But it is required if you want to sell the business later on, or if you want to license it to another company who might want to do some due diligence. And again, it came in extremely beneficial when Harcourt's turned around and said, great, we want to use your software, but before we do, can we take a look at how it works? And they ran some due diligence on us, and they wouldn't have become a customer if we didn't have that stuff documented. So, things like marketing, things like cash flow projections. The government wants to see if they're going to give you this money, are you going to be around long enough to spend it? And again, that's something we hadn't sort of planned for before. So from a purely sort of head in the cloud entrepreneurial perspective, it's a very grounding experience to get down to that nitty gritty if you want that money.
Quick yes no, was yours a competitive grant or
the Film Victoria Digital Media Prototyping Grant was competitive. One of the other that we've applied, I think we probably received, just doing the math really quickly in my head, there's probably about 20 grand in there in market export funds that aren't competitive.
Did you find that there was the same detail that was required for the other grants that were?
If I'm referring specifically to certain grant types, because I think I have to speak from the perspective of those, the Multimedia Victoria ICT Trade Fairs grants are actually fairly easy grants to apply for. They do ask for a lot of documentation on the face of it, but actually at the end of the day, you don't actually have to provide that much to get the document, to get the funds. I mean, they provide some examples of what they call it's called an export plan. Yeah, export market plan, and the example they give you is like this 20, 30 page template, and at the end of the day, ours is like 5 at the end, and we still got approved. So I think a lot of the time, the government might sort of over-provide examples, which are very heavily worded documents, but those sort of multimedia Victoria type, ICT type grants, we applied for $2,500 a couple of times, and a $4,500 one. We're about to do an $8,000 one, and it's pretty much the same process each time. In fact, it's almost cut and paste, depending on what events you're going to.
So let's talk about the armoury, things that you need. I think Adrian wants to comment about that already.
Well, I just wanted to add to that is that we're familiar with 350 government grant programs for businesses, and I'd say there's probably always 3 requirements for additional or supporting or even the information that's in the application, and they fall into technical, commercial and financial. And generally there's got to be something technical about the project. Generally there's got to be something commercial like a business plan or a marketing strategy or some component of that. And then there's the finances. Normally there's got to be a budget, and it's usually got to be backed up by financials or cash flows or those sort of things. Across most of the programs, I'd say those 3 always just crop up.
So in terms of the armoury, what sort of things we're talking about? I know that Nadja, when you first went out, you didn't have a company, you didn't have an ABN. That's obviously the foundation. Then from there, but you weren't a company. But from there, I mean, like perhaps Jefferson wants to.
When I built Grade from just myself to at one point we had over 55 engineers and designers. So it's quite a big group of people to manage. And the best thing, the best grant you get every year is the R&D tax offset. It's beautiful. So you just need a really easy way of managing your time, and there's a really good tool we found called Web Timesheet by Replicon. $200 per seat. Runs on a browser, so it's just a piece of cake. And you can set up your tasks. I just set all the tasks from project plans, we can enter them manually, and every day everyone spills to that. So at the end of the week or month, you get a very elaborate, very good report, and it shows that clarity, that absolute clarity that you want to see. And we use KPMG every year to do multiple claims, and it's really just a matter of hitting the print button almost and submitting it. It makes life so easy. So that's the best looking.
So armoury is a demonstration of the workflow, what you've got, finances, cash flow, so your annual reports. What's that? Your CV, because I've got to want to know there's a good management team.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of when I used to write grants. That's when I was doing that. Definitely, the things that people look at is other people who are running the business. So what's your CV? What's your experience? Do you actually realise what functions you need to run that company and make it successful? So what are the gaps in your set of people who have the idea, and how you're going to fill that gap? And then it will be exactly like going through a business plan. So if you think about what is your vision, what's your strategy, what are your core capabilities, then you think about what's your marketing plan, and that often boils down to a very tactical one, what you're actually going to do in the first year, and then you can be more general in the second and third year.
Do you know what,
IT, financials, cash flow, and I'm trying to think what else. And maybe, and the appendix, and innovation, like why, and the conditions of the grant, how you actually, you have to address those objectives of the grant specifically and spell it out. It's like writing a cover letter for your resume. you say what they want and you match how you match what they need, really.
From my experience, when I received the Common Grant, I had to, before I received it, I had to put in my CV and what was my shortcomings and what were my strengths. And the great thing it's about getting some of these grants, it's not just the money that comes through that helps you, develop more prototypes or develop the technology. It's actually getting a business advisor to help you, work on parts of yourself or your company that aren't strong enough for you to get the product into the commercial, having it commercially successful. So that's sort of having that is on top of the grant is actually really fantastic.
Okay, yeah.
So just one comment, Sarah Dodds. From bitter experience, there is one comment I'd like to make, and that's particularly about the R&D tax concession and the tax offset, is that you apply for it at the end of the financial year, and when you start applying, you discover the things that you should have been doing all year. I applied for it with a startup company that I was running, and we had to completely rebuild our financial system because the way we had been keeping our books wasn't compliant with what the grant needed. So if you're intending to apply for an R&D tax grant, go talk to somebody well before that starts and save yourself a huge amount of grief and get things right from day one.
It's the entrepreneur's dilemma. You start a business and you start putting the invoices in shoeboxes until the end. You get to the end of your first year and then you've suddenly got to do your tax and you really wish that you'd bought that MYOB package, and then next year you do the whatever it is and the MYOB package, and you get the investor comes and you wish that you'd gone to KPMG or ordered your books, and then you get to the third year and onwards it goes. What fun we all have living and running businesses.
Hi, question around IP. What are some of the valuable lessons learned in protecting IP, particularly when you're venturing overseas, maybe from a software development point of view?
So interesting. I have all these themes. Like one of them's IP, and I don't even need to ask them. It's, just turn around.
So, protection of IP from a software perspective, I mean, obviously there's certain design elements you can include to protect your IP anyway. But certainly, things like patents and so on are definitely things that the government will fund. They recognise the right to protect your IP is a very important part of exporting your technologies. The other thing is certainly trademarks and stuff. There's a common joke amongst the entrepreneurial community of Australia going overseas. When you hit the US and you start to do business, you'll get a welcome letter. The welcome letter is someone suing you for infringing upon their IP. And apparently, I haven't got mine yet, but I expect it, in the next month or two. There's a lot of in foreign markets. There's a lot of ways people make money, and one of those is suing, green companies that are just setting up overseas and hoping that they'll pay up because you infringe their IP. Again, I'm speaking from my own perspective in the US market. I would say that a patent in particular in the US is less about protecting your IP and it's more of a legal defense strategy in general. You should really go to the US with a patent under your belt because you will get sued, and if you've got a patent to match their patent, they normally go away. If you don't have a patent to match their patent, you're going to end up probably going to court. It's going to cost you a lot of money. And again, the government's fairly aware of that and conscious of it. And certainly a lot of grant funding does allow you to claim protecting your IP as part of your application.